So, this is Bob Coppage, CEO, Simplex-IT, Crotchio Geek, and welcome to the latest episode of BizTech Twists, where we take a look at topics that are all over the bloody place and try to find a way to use them to look at business and technology, but with a different perspective, a twist, if you will. And here's the thing. I've been telling you guys for a while, that you're supposed to go maul an online thumb by clicking it, and how you're supposed to subscribe, because you don't want to scribe, you want to subscribe. And then you should tell your friends, assuming you have it. But not a lot of you have. I mean, some of you have, and that's absolutely great, but not as many as I think you should. And I was thinking that we need a viral topic. And I have absolutely no skills whatsoever knowing what one of them is, except for one, and this is what we're going to talk about today: why Legos suck. Okay. Now, there's a lot of you, probably some of you are like literally in the midst of trying to create that just so feeling for your Millennium Falcon or your Eiffel Tower or whatever. They're going, what? How could he be saying that? He just is looking for the clicks. And yeah, there's some truth to that. But I actually mean something behind that. We're going to talk about that. And yes, there is a perspective of business that we're going to talk about as well. But first of all, let's talk about me, shall we? And when I'm saying that is, let's talk about the world of blocks when I was a kid. And we are talking, yes, back in the mid-late 60s, early 70s. Because back then, that the kids were the only ones who played with blocks. Anyway, so you basically had Lincoln Logs, you had Tinker Toys, and you had Legos. And here's the thing, or Erector sets to a degree. Each of those sets would come up with these predefined pieces, parts that you then could combine and make into something. But what it was you made was up to you. All right? Meaning that it would give you some ideas. Here's a bunch of tools. You could make a race car, you could make a robot, you can make, and none of the race cars or robots or anything were terribly robotic or race car-ish or whatever, but they were basically giving you ideas, because at the end of the day, it was going to be up to your imagination. You figured out what you were going to create. You figured out what it was that all of these things combined would make. And spoiler alert, this is where we're going. Now, this included Legos. Legos, for the most part, did not, in the beginning, come back with, you were going to make a Millennium Falcon. You are going to make this one thing. They basically just said, yeah, here's some ideas. Here's some things you could do. And it wasn't until about 20 years ago, and I think there's a story behind this, where Legos actually discovered some people who were making specific buildings, and they said, hey, let's go ahead and do this. But the bottom line is, Legos transformed from a product where the consumption of the product involved mass use of imagination, and instead become you're basically going to build this. You're going to buy something that is predetermined to look like this, act like this, be like this, that is predetermined to go through these specific paces. And essentially, you're going to end up with something that is interesting once. Because you take it apart, what are you going to do? Put the whole same thing back together again? And to me, this is losing a big part of what building blocks were. When I was a kid, it was our imagination. We had to. We didn't have a list of here's what you can build specifically that was particularly cool. So we had to take the toys, and we actually figured out ways to make Legos, Lincoln Logs, and Tinker Toys, and use them together to make collaborative things, because we didn't know we couldn't. We didn't know we shouldn't. And I think there's a lot of things that are missing today in both our lives as well as kids, because I'm not sure how many kids are building the huge, 5,000 piece Millennium Falcon. Yes, I'm talking about you, Adam. And part of the challenge is that a lot of what's happening today is because our imaginations are being driven by somebody else. We're being told what to believe, what, third party doomsday or whatever you want to call it. We're supposed to be loving this or liking this or hating this or whatever. And somebody else is basically putting those pieces together and telling us, and this is the only thing you can make out of it. And I think businesses and organizations fall into the same area. And which is odd because at the same time, we want to build, when you're talking about goods and services that an organization is creating, the goods and services are driven, yes, they're driven by client needs or demands, but they're also driven by the producer coming up with ideas or coming up with ways of, hey, we can build on our market space by adding this. And I remember back in the 90s, because again, I am old, right? Where all of a sudden everything had lemon added to it. It was like this fruit was discovered that didn't exist before. And those of you who are old enough, you remember the Tidy Bowl cleaner. There was about 2 years of commercials that just talked about how lemon was now in the toilet bowl so that your toilets could smell lemony. And my point is that simple addition to their product warranted their entire marketing and sales goals and objectives. McDonald's being beaten up by Burger King, who basically said, have it your way. These are examples where organizations essentially said, here's our existing product, let's add something to it. When we talk about manufacturing, if you're making widgets, well, what if you make widgets that have lemon, I guess, but widgets that had additional, whether it is they are heavy duty widgets, they are online cloud-based widgets, they are widgets with high security, whatever the heck a widget is, and the like. These are all people taking a look at existing goods and services and going, hey, let's add something to it. And what did that require? That required not only an understanding and appreciation of the market, but also an understanding and appreciation of the imagination that could be engaged to not only say, this is what our clients are asking for, but also to say, this is what our clients want, even though they don't know it yet. And every time we go to building block kits where they tell us, this is what you will put together when you spread out all of these individual pieces, in my opinion, we may not be killing that little piece of imagination, but we're letting it atrophy. And that to me is dangerous, especially from an organizational standpoint. If your organization is simply doing market research, is simply going out there and saying, what do our clients, what are they demanding? What are they asking for? And we're simply taking what they ask for and what they're demanding at face value and add it. Are we that much better than a Lego kit? And similarly, if we look what our competition do and say, well, let's do that, we're basically building another Millennium Falcon. And not that there's anything wrong about there is. Star Wars is a child's show, okay? You know, I mean, how can everything important in the universe happen on planets full of sand? You know, I don't get that one aspect of it. Anyway, I digress. And here's another aspect of this that's going on, though, is when I was a kid, I grew up with about 10 to 20% of my playtime being regulated. And by regulated, I mean lessons or leagues or group sports or whatever, where I had to be somewhere, whether it be my parents take me or I walk or rode my bike, whatever, where I had to be somewhere and do something specific. I played Little League ball. And by the way, back in the 1960s and 70s, everybody got a trophy. This is not anything new. I still have my participation trophy from the Trish Speaker Baseball League that I think is from 1968. So attaboy trophies or participation trophies are nothing new. Get over it. But we didn't do that much of it. Everything else was, why are you still in the house? It's sunny. Go outside. And yes, play in traffic. But go out and do something. So I had to go out and I had to negotiate. I had to find other kids in the neighborhood. We had to negotiate what we were going to do, how we were going to do it, who's going to be on what team, who's going to play what are the rules? What's first base? What's third base? At what point do we get out of the way when a car's coming? So on and so forth. Then we had to negotiate that. We had to deal with any kind of rule changes. We had to deal with any kind of people being added to or removed from because parents called or the like. We had to deal with all those things. And we had to also find things to do. I can't tell you how many versions of tag there were. freeze tag, TV tag, because we had to use our imagination. And now, and granted, I'm in grandfather mode, but now it's everywhere you look, it's organized. Everywhere you look, and with the best of intentions, And I'm not blaming the kids. I'm not even blaming the parents. I'm blaming us. Because this has been something that's been going on for decades. And I truly do believe it is finding its way into organizations. Harlan Ellison was a science fiction writer. He actually went to the same high school I did. And I feel we've been great buddies except for, like 20 years difference. But one of the things I loved about his books was his introductions, because he was one of the most blunt, arrogant, brilliant writers I've ever met. And he had one collection of short stories book called Strange Wine. And I'll never forget the introduction, the title of the introduction was called Revealed at Last, What Really Killed the Dinosaurs, and You Don't Look So Hot Yourself. And it truly was talking, and mind you, this would have been 1974 or so. And he was talking about how television, because he was essentially that strange wine is imagination. Strange wine is creativity, controlled with guardrails on it to make sure that it's still appropriate, that it still is applicable to the situation, to the goals and objectives of the organization or the group of kids who are out playing stickball. But let loose the imagination. And his point was, at that time, that television was killing imagination, was essentially making it so that even when we did use imagination, we used it as we were told to by television, whether it be through the purchasing of toys, or it's going to be Westerns, or it's going to be a particular genre or a particular style. Unless it was Star Trek. If it was Star Trek, that was cool, because Star Trek had maybe one episode that had to do with the desert. Okay? And that had Gorn in it, so that was cool. Millennium Falcon. But the thing is that as you look, all of the things that are feeding us, that are telling us what to think, that are telling us how to behave, and you'll notice this is not a right wing or a left wing or conspiratorial, because all of these companies are trying to get us to buy things. All of these companies are trying to get us to engage. All of these companies are trying to essentially buy our attention. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're selling, you and me, is we're selling our attention. And the best way they can do that is to basically make it so that we don't have to use our imagination. When a consultant comes to you and says, I can solve all your problems, if they come to you and they're going to solve your problems, your imagination has nothing to do with it. When you talk about what's the differentiator between you and your organization, if none of it has to do with your imagination, you're a commodity, or you will be. Imagination is the thing that sets us apart. When you talk about AI, guess what? AI doesn't have imagination. It has an aggregate of old, stale data that it can use and it can put together and interpolate or extrapolate to your heart's content. But it's never going to come up with truly an imaginative idea. And if you're not careful, neither will your organization. So here's the idea. If you've got a bunch of Legos kits, mix them together. Throw away the instructions in the diagram. See what you can put together. I'll bet it's cooler than a Millennium Falcon. What do you think? So tell me what you built and give me a thumbs up, because I'm dealing with some social anxiety without it. Subscribe. Let me know what you think. And how do you keep your imagination going? Bob Coppage, Crotch Shield Geek. Catch you later.